All right, coming down in 3, 2, 1. Welcome on into the Cougar Tracks podcast, powered by KSLSports.com. I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. Happy as always to have you on board the podcast wherever and however you may be listening to the show. BYU improves to 3-0 on the season. The Cougs take down the Wyoming Cowboys 34-14 in Laramie. I was there inside War Memorial Stadium for BYU's pretty dominant win. And this is the post-game reaction show here on the Cougar Tracks podcast. And the game was never in doubt. From the opening kick, BYU was the better football team. And that carried itself throughout the game. I think the only thing that you come away from with this game is that BYU left some opportunities to score more points, to maybe get a few impact plays on defense. They left that out on the field at War Memorial. And I think that's something where Kalani Sitake and his staff are going to point to the guys and say, hey, you might be 3-0, but you got to clean this up. You got to figure this out. Find ways to get this corrected and get this right. So there's still a lot to improve on for BYU coming out of that win, but BYU was the far better football team. And they looked and felt and acted as such. And, you know, I think one of the underrated things, too, that you saw in that game, BYU was last a conference member with Wyoming. It's been a while now, 14 years. But the difference in the size, the difference in the speed, the athletes, sizable advantage for BYU. And I thought that was noteworthy because typically, historically, BYU has never had that. They've never been that team that's just bigger, stronger, faster. That was the case on Saturday, and BYU really could have beat Wyoming by 50. But they left some opportunities out there. And one of the great highlights, though, from the game was Kellen Maran. 100-yard kickoff return to open the third quarter. Special stuff there from Kellen. Those are the moments that you go down in BYU lore because you will always be remembered for that kickoff return. Like Adam Hine gets brought up again 10 years after his kickoff return against Virginia. It's a select company that have been able to return kicks for a touchdown. It's a hard thing to do. And it's funny that, you know, on Friday night, I mentioned that on the podcast here. If you go listen to the preview show, I noted that the return game needed to make an impact. And, hey, Kellen Maran made me look smart as he gets that big kickoff return that really dampened any sort of thought that Wyoming would pull off a comeback or get in the game and make this thing competitive. That just silenced the crowd. And you knew in that moment the game was completely over, and then BYU just coasted to a comfortable 34-14 win in Laramie. But that was a great moment for Kellen, and he was clearly excited, and rightfully so. Because last season, you know, he was expected to do some big things for BYU, but it just never materialized. That was the case with so many guys in the BYU program last year. He was a new post-spring addition, and he's really settled in now. Kellen's had some struggles returning kicks. Like, some of his decisions have not been great returning kickoffs this season. He's been very aggressive, and some of his decisions have led to BYU starting at the 14, 15, 16, somewhere in there, kind of like what I always do in college football 25. But that aggressiveness did pay off against a bad Wyoming team, and he popped off for a 100-yard kickoff return for a TD. I think back to Adam Hine. I believe Mike Rettl had one. Cody Hoffman had one in 2011. I think it was against Central Florida. James Dye had one. He might have had multiple. I know he had punt return multiple ones. I think Jaron Dabney had one. Visek Ahema. I mean, it's a select few. And you go back to Visek Ahema, that's 40 years ago. So there are not many guys that joined the ranks of the group that Kellen Maran is now part of. So congrats to him on that. Congrats just again to the BYU football team for taking care of business and going into Laramie, a hostile environment. I'm sure everyone that watched the game on TV heard the TV mics pick up some choice chants for BYU and the players. They're right on top of you at War Memorial Stadium, and they made their voices heard. Even though their team was really bad and BYU just suffocated that team, they still got their choice words in to BYU. Jake Rettl had a solid performance on Saturday night. I thought Jake got better on Saturday in that win over the Pokes. He finished with 22 of 36, 291 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. The interception, I think, was fine. It was kind of a jump ball to Cody Epps, and maybe you don't want Cody to be that jump ball target in the future, but ultimately it kind of resulted as a punt where Wyoming took over on their own 1-yard line. So if you're going to have a turnover there where you're being aggressive, taking a shot for the end zone, you'll take that. It was the mistakes last week at SMU where he's throwing a pick at the line of scrimmage. Did he even see the defensive lineman? Stuff like that you can't excuse. And on top of only 1 interception, he didn't fumble the ball at all. So Jake had a really good night. He did have some passes that were close calls. And when you get in a Big 12 play against better secondaries, against better defenses, you fear that some of those close calls are going to flip the other side and go to the defense. So he's got to clean that up. But I thought he was aggressive. I thought the deep ball was working for him. He had 8 passes, completions for 20 yards or more. Jake played well. And, there was a moment in the second quarter where Gary Bohanan was throwing a few passes. I wouldn't constitute it as warming up. He was just throwing the ball a little bit. And, there was a feeling maybe that he was, but I didn't get the vibe from watching it in the press box that it was going to be anything that, he's being thrown in. I know the media was like thinking he's getting inserted in and he's going to be ready to go. It just, the body language didn't say that it was his time. It was his moment. He's a calm guy to begin with, but his body language didn't say that, I just got the phone call, I'm going in. It was more just like he's just kind of keeping his arm warm just for the heck of it to throw a football. Gary, by the way, when he did go in the game late, which earned some loud roars from BYU fans, I thought he played well. 3 of 3 passing the football, and his first ball was a completion for 14 yards to Reiner Swanson. That was his first pass since October of 2022 in a college football game. So pretty special moment for Gary Bohanan, working his way back from the shoulder injury, and he completes a nice ball to Reiner Swanson and made the most of his opportunity. I thought he showed well in his one drive to close out the game and finish it off. The running backs were a big story coming into this game as BYU was without LJ Martin, who has the ankle injury, and then Hinkley Ropati with the knee injury. Those guys were out. They didn't even make the trip to Laramie. So BYU had Miles Davis, they had Sione Aimoa, and then they had Pokayawa Honga. They had Enoch Nawahine there too. He was warming up, but he didn't end up playing. Kalani Sitake said he got banged up. So it was Sione Aimoa, who was your 5th-string running back coming into the season, and then Pokayawa Honga. I mean, they were getting thrusted into key roles for that BYU offense. And Honga, I thought, showed pretty well. His most action came in the second half. He was part of that special play that was a reverse back to Jake Retzloff. He threw the ball, and then Retzloff tossed it downfield 30 yards to Chase Roberts. Pokai did a really nice job. BYU's ground attack, though, did not do great without LJ Martin and Hinkley Ropati. Outside of the 62 rushing yards from Jake Retzloff, the running backs combined for 88 yards on 22 carries. It's okay, 4 yards, I guess. That's all right. You want to get more to that 5 yards per carry range, but I just kind of worry a little bit that that's not going to carry over against a physical Kansas State team next week. But, that's an area where BYU has to improve. The good thing is that BYU had a lot of production from the receivers. They had 12 different guys catch passes in the game, led by Chase Roberts. He had 6 catches for 129 yards, along of 30 that I mentioned on that trick play. Chase was big time. I mean, he looked like an NFL receiver out there, and I said that in week 1. Good things are going to happen for BYU if they keep targeting Chase Roberts. And I think it's noteworthy that through 3 weeks, BYU has clearly identified a wide receiver number 1. Because I came into the season feeling like BYU's wide receiver unit is deep, but they don't have any star power. They don't have a Puka Nacua. Now, they still don't have a Puka Nacua. I mean, that's an all-timer. But you've got a star player at the top who is your clear-cut number 1, and that's Chase Roberts. And then you stack it up with Darius Laster, Cody Epps, Kellen Maran, Parker Kingston. And you go, if Parker Kingston's your wide receiver 5, man, it's a pretty good wide receiver room, and you saw that from BYU tonight. They were a really good group as a whole. I thought the offensive line did okay. I mean, the penalties are an area where BYU has to get better. They had 9 penalties, and that was uncharacteristic compared to the first 2 weeks of the season. A couple holding penalties. Connor Pay had some. There was a extra defender on the field. I think that was Evan Johnson, who I'll get to a little bit later. They were making some uncharacteristic mistakes that just we had not seen through the first 2 weeks. And that's going to be something that Kalani's got to hit home. Like, guys, you're 3-0. We were in this spot last year. Don't think we're all high and mighty. And we got to get that fixed. We got to clean that up and not let the penalties become a bug that plagues this team in Big 12 play. Defense, I thought, was really good. I mean, BYU's defense, it was a combination of Wyoming's offense is really bad, but BYU's defense is real, and they are ready for the battles of the Big 12. Tyler Batty was an absolute stud on Saturday night. Like, he could not be stopped. And, his stat line, he ends up with 4 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and you think that's just kind of light. It feels like you think more, but man, the amount of attention that he receives from opposing offenses, yet he's still pushing offensive linemen back. I mean, Batty took a big step forward in this game. I mean, he's just been good all throughout the year, but he was even better. He just dominated his opponents, whoever he faced. Harrison Tagger, I thought, had a really nice game. BYU only had 1 sack in the game. I thought that was kind of noteworthy. I thought Wyoming's offensive line played better than they had showed against Arizona State and against Idaho. So credit to the Pokes for, kind of having a little bit more try in them. They battled a lot better this week against BYU, but the 1 sack was courtesy of Jack Kelly, who is just a speed demon. He was all over the place for BYU. Some personnel notes on the defensive side that were kind of underrated. Crew Wakely gets the start at strong safety, and then Micah Harper, he was banged up. He didn't really play at all, and they started out the game in nickel. Jacob Robinson was at the nickel spot, and then Evan Johnson and Mark Collins were the starting cornerbacks. Micah Harper, something to monitor with him because he has not been the playmaker that everyone expected him to be coming back from the injury. He looks a little bit banged up. He was suited up on the sideline, but did not go really at all in that game. So Kalani acknowledged that Micah Harper was banged up. So that's going to be something to monitor moving forward for BYU. But the nice thing is that they've got a lot of options at safety. The nickel spot, if Micah is not full go, it's going to be Jacob Robinson. And the emergence of Evan Johnson at cornerback has allowed them to have that versatility and flexibility. Evan Johnson gets his first career interception, and Shmeev, as the team calls him, he's really coming into his own. And Kalani noted in the postgame that that's a guy now that they can turn to. They can rely on. He's a veteran. They trust him. That's half the battle. To get onto the field, you got to be trusted by the coaches, and they do. And, there's so much brain power committed to the cornerback position. Really, all the positions around the program, you're seeing more and more analysts popping up. But Robertson Daniel, Coach General Guilford, you've got so many guys that are paying attention to that cornerback room, and that group is playing at a high level. It was fascinating to me how Evan Svoboda for Wyoming tried to target Jacob Robinson's side of the field like 5 times. Dude, you're not going to make many plays. Now, Jacob Robinson's like, please, by all means, keep throwing to my side of the field. And Jay Hill's probably going, yes, throw to Jacob Robinson's side of the field because that's good things for us. And Jacob Robinson, absolute lockdown corner. He was brilliant in coverage on Saturday night. Wyoming's offense, they struggle bad. Evan Svoboda, he had opportunities to connect. There was a 4th down where he had a receiver, I believe it was, I have a note here, Jaylen Sargent, wide open in the end zone, 4th down. Sargent had Talon Alfrey beat, and Svoboda's just got to make the ball. He's just got to throw it and get it to the receiver. Nowhere in the same zip code. I mean, it was a bad pass, and I just don't know how Wyoming keeps going with him. I really thought Svoboda was going to be good for Wyoming. I mean, 6'5", 245. I mean, the running ability, the dude's a physical freak, but his passing ability, there were times where he had more carries than he did completions. Long way to go for Wyoming if they're going to get out of this rut that they're currently in. But, you know, BYU's cornerbacks completely shut him down. I thought it was also a positive, too, that some of the young guys got opportunities late in the game to play snaps. You saw Jonathan Cabella. Cabella in the pregame, he had a bloody nose that he left the field because he had blood all over his practice shirt. But he got some snaps. Bodie Schoonover, Tommy Parasis, a lot of young guys taking snaps because BYU was in blowout mode. And last year you didn't have that luxury where, you know, you're winning blowouts. 2 of the first 3 games of the season, you had blowouts, so young guys were getting chances to play. So that was a positive as well. Some other personnel notes, Sonny Mocassini, who got banged up at the end of the SMU game, he was out. Austin Leausa replaced him, and Leausa got called, I think, the first offensive series for a holding, if memory serves me right, but it didn't look like it was on Leausa, but I think they called him for that holding penalty. Leausa had a holding, but by all accounts did pretty good. It was noteworthy, too, Leausa, because he was the backup right guard with Mocassini, and he was the backup right tackle, who were going to be the backups in replace of him moving up to the starting lineup. Trevin Osler, backup right guard, and then Caden Chichester, backup right tackle. So it's kind of some deep cuts there on the depth chart for BYU if, you know, Sonny Mocassini misses extra time. But, you know, BYU got out of the game pretty healthy. You know, Nawahine nicked up, Micah Harper banged up, Keanu Hill, that was a scary moment. The Wyoming defender, Rook Brown, number 2, that was a nasty hit, and I didn't like that at all. And it was just a scary moment just watching it live when you saw Kibo's helmet basically go to the side and just it just instantly jolted back. It looked intense in the moment. Then when he got up and was clearly wobbly, that was just scary stuff. And you kind of thought to yourself, if there's a game where Kalani Sitake should just run it up, this would probably be the game because of antics like that, because it didn't feel like Rook Brown, I'm not going to speak for his thought process, but it didn't seem like he was remorseful about that. And I know you want to lay your physicality and hard hits, whatnot, I get all that, but that seemed a little bit extra. It seemed like a little bit unnecessary, and he got called with the targeting, and he's going to be suspended for the first half of next week, and hopefully Keanu Hill is going to be okay, because he was clutch for BYU in the first half on 4th down conversions. He was the go-to. I mean, he converted those 2 4th downs to keep drives going, and that's an area where BYU needs to get better, 3rd down conversions, because, man, BYU was struggling on that front against Wyoming. They didn't convert a third down until it's like the third quarter. So BYU's got to improve in that area of the game going forward. BYU finished 2 of 11 on third down conversions in the game. By comparison, Wyoming, surprisingly, 8 of 18. So not quite 50%, but a decent clip, a lot better than what SMU did against BYU's defense. So that's going to be somewhere BYU's got to improve, because in Big 12 play, if you can't move the sticks, man, that is not going to bode well for BYU to win ball games in this league. But it's a big win. The amenities in Laramie were about what you would expect on the Front Range. It was nothing spectacular. They had a lot of construction on the media sideline, so basically the TV view. So it was complete construction in the concourse. So basically dirt, gravel, one elevator going up to the press box. It was a different experience. And it reminded me of just like Laramie of old. It was the old Laramie that I remembered all those years ago when BYU was in the Mountain West Conference. So it was a fun experience, but safe to say I'm glad that BYU is long removed from those days in the Mountain West Conference and settling into life now in the Big 12. Jimmer Fredette was there at the game, which was pretty cool to see. And then not as much of a BYU fan contingent for this one, because one, I don't think Wyoming was the game that fans were like, I want to go to that one. I don't think really anyone wanted to go to it. But there were still a nice pockets of BYU fans there, and it's just tough to get to. It's tough to get to Laramie because if you're coming from Salt Lake, probably the best move is the drive. It's tough to find flights into Cheyenne, and then if you're going to fly into Denver, you got to still drive 2 hours into Laramie. So it's a tough place to get to, and I don't believe that we'll ever see BYU and Wyoming play again unless it's in some crazy bowl game matchup, because, you know, between now and 2035, there's a lot of games already filled up on BYU schedules, and you got to think before 2035, you're probably going to see a new AD at some point at BYU. So I struggle to picture the next AD, he or she, having the same nostalgia about BYU and Wyoming as Tom Homo does. And so BYU improves to 3-0, second consecutive year. The Cougars are perfect in non-conference play. And I think what's noteworthy here is that BYU is 3-0 after getting 2 wins on the road. And look, I criticized the scheduling tactics of BYU administration for this schedule. I thought it was not the right moves to go 2 games on the road in non-conference. No one does that in the Big 12, but now that it's over and you've got a perfect record, it worked out. Now you've been banged up pretty good in some areas, not others, but you know, it all worked out. You're 3-0 and you've got everything in front of you going into Big 12 play, and you just hope that the best is still yet to come, because last year's team, it went completely sideways. And the messaging that this team is close-knit, they are a tight group, and that's going to lead them to more success in the future this season. I do believe that this team, they've got a good mindset about them. They keep things in perspective. They don't let the stage, the adversity get to them. They just go to the next play. And I think they've got the right mindset. After all the headaches they dealt with last year, I think it's given them a lot of good perspective. And they're playing some pretty good football right now as they get ready for Big 12 play beginning next Saturday against Kansas State. Undefeated showdown late night in Provo, 8:30 kick on KSL News Radio and ESPN. That's going to be a fun one next week at LaVell Edwards Stadium. We'll have coverage throughout the week on KSLSports.com and here on the Cougar Tracks podcast. So I'll talk to you next time here on the Cougar Tracks podcast, and it's powered by KSLSports.com.